You're listening to WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, Singles Talk Radio Channel, where we take a lighthearted and candid approach to discussions on the journey of relationship loss, divorce, parenting, being single, relationships building, dating, and yes, sex. Join our listeners and begin living your best life.
Hello, everyone. This is Rosalind Sedaka, and you are listening to Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sedaka. I'm excited to have you with me today, and I'm excited to introduce you to our guest because we have a show that I think is going to be of great value to you. I want to remind you that we're on the Going Solo Network, WGSN-DB, and our guest today, who is coming to us from Australia, is Christina Starr. And Christina is the author of a new book, Recover, Rebuild, Thrive, which we'll be talking about a little later. Let me tell you a bit about her. She's a registered psychologist and author with extensive experience in private practice as a corporate consultant, a critical incident counselor, a trauma consultant, and a workshop facilitator. With deep understanding of psychological pain, its impact, and the complex issues of managing difficult life challenges, Christina's work offers new perspectives, insights, and practical tips and easy strategies that can be applied straight away. Her approach is focused on solutions, multidisciplinary, and based on a spiritual outlook on life. And in addition to working with clients, Christiana offers a diverse range of free online resources that can be accessed via her website and social media. So I am thrilled and honored to introduce you to Christiana Starr. Welcome, Christiana.
Hi, Rosalind. I'm delighted to be on your show.
Well, thank you. We are going to be talking about resilience and recovering and rebuilding life, and that's an issue that no one wants to be having to face. But unfortunately, life throws curveballs at us from time to time, and most of us have experienced hardship and difficult challenges. And so I really appreciate your expertise. And I wanted to start by just asking where your interest in personal resilience comes from.
Well, it comes from two sources. One, as you already mentioned, like everybody else, I have had a lot of difficult life changes. I'm divorced, as the clientele. As a younger person, I experienced a lot of deaths among friends and acquaintances. I've had 2 car accidents, cancer. I was changing countries and professions. So there is quite a challenge in my personal life of bouncing back and turning, adversity into something that works for me.
Wow.
So, but that's just my little personal story. But the more professional interest in resilience is actually quite an interesting story. I was a young psychologist in private practice, and one day a colleague asked me if I would fill in for him while he goes walkabout for 6 months. Now, so of course I said yes. And it turned out that he had contracts with a lot of large global companies to come in and debrief after critical incidents. And so I began to be called, for example, to cigarette companies when they had armed hold-ups of their delivery drivers. And of course, these people would always say, I'm never going to go back into the van and deliver cigarettes. Now, these people were initially drivers for bread and less dangerous things. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it was there were a lot of Asian gangs who routinely held up these delivery vans. So I found myself in the position where I had to help people get back on track quickly, because if a driver doesn't drive, his life really is not going very well. So I ended up attending a lot of armed hold-ups, industrial accidents, job losses, office invasions, and so on and so on. And because the companies would call the psychologist in, but they don't offer a lot of hours to deal with and to help people. So I found that I had to quickly develop little programs for people to help themselves get back on track. And that really hasn't stopped all along. I still do critical incidents, which are a little bit less harmful these days, but it is something that I really like doing, and it always involves teaching people, you know, how to help themselves. And as a former teacher in Germany, I find that quite easy to do, to develop these programs. So that's how I started, Rosalind.
Well, that's very interesting. So you've really been in the trenches, so to speak. Let me ask you a really important question. If someone has been severely tested by something in life, what makes it possible for them to keep from falling apart and developing into a stronger and better person after those tests?
Yes, obviously that is an individual situation. It depends on how this person grew up and what was modeled to them in their early years. But independent of that, there are a few points that are really essential. And one of the points is to understand the process of change. Now, there's different ways of looking at change, but I think this one is most useful to people who are tested. And a change usually consists of 3 phases. They overlap and merge into each other. But basically, there's these 3 phases. One is the ending, which we all know. Something has finished, something doesn't work anymore, you can't continue with what life was like before. So something has ended, and that's quite a painful phase, of course. Then comes a phase that's almost even more turbulent and upsetting, and that is an in-between, where you are not in the old one anymore, but you are also haven't really developed anything new yet. So that is an transitionary phase. And thirdly, the last phase would be the new beginnings. And, of course, that is not a clear-cut division. Sometimes you feel you're moving forward. Sometimes you feel you're absolutely standing still. So, but it's useful to know that no matter how uncomfortable your new change is, there is light at the end of the tunnel if you hang in there through the turbulence. So that's, I think, sorry.
Well, I'm saying that is such an important point. I think for many people, things can feel so depressing and dire and frightening that you really aren't seeing that light at the end of the tunnel, even though you're right. Ultimately, there usually is one.
Yes, and that brings me to the second point, Rosalind, and that is, to remember and understand that we have choices in every situation. And when adversity comes, we have the choice how we think about it and what we are telling ourselves about the situation, as well as what we do. You see, we can have a perspective where we say, all is lost, my life is finished, I'm totally devastated, nothing will ever be the same anymore. But on the other side, we can also take a broader, much more detached view. I call it the helicopter view, where you say, okay, this is a detour, this is a hiccup, this is a roadblock, but it's not the end of the world. I'm still here, I have my strength, I can keep going. So the choice of perspective is an absolute essential part of bouncing back. And that includes, of course, refusing to remain a victim. We might find ourselves helpless and hopeless for a little while, but then we need to take responsibility and deal with the issues.
I so love what you're saying. I also give so much emphasis to choices in life. I think that's one of the crucial keys. And in my work with divorcing and co-parenting couples, the focus is always on the fact that we can make better or not such good choices in life, and the impact of those choices will impact us in the future. So think about the fact that there's usually more choices available to us than we realize. I so appreciate your mentioning the importance of that.
Yes, and I'd just like to underline that it is the and reiterate that we're making choices not only about what we do, but about how we think.
Yes.
And that's the important part. And because if we think differently, it will free up a lot of resources in ourselves to move forward.
I totally agree. Thank you for that. So what are some of the main keys for dealing with difficult changes? What else can we be doing?
Well, that's quite a number. Let's pick out a few ones. First one I would say is we need to accept reality. Now, that sounds pretty obvious, but it's actually something we find really hard to do when we are challenged, because often in our life we have our plans, we are expecting certain outcomes. We may even have a sense of entitlement to not be so challenged. And all of these are really stopping us from saying, okay, I don't like what happened. I didn't deserve what happened, but it is what it is. And it's really only when we stop our expectations that things should be different to what they are and accept exactly what is, that's when we have a firm basis to move forward.
Yes. That's such an important point, so thank you for making it.
Well, the next point related to that is actually, the where we focus our attention. And most of us find it really easy to focus on the problems. This doesn't work anymore, and that door is closed, and I'm now in pain, or whatever the situation is. There's problems. But in order to really move on from difficult life changes, we need to focus on solutions, which means making a plan, knowing our resources, and that means internal resources like strength and persistence and previous experiences, but also external resources like people who can help us or bring us information. So the point is to focus on solutions, on what can we do to make the best of this situation rather than being stuck in the problems. And I often like to talk about analysis paralysis with clients, because most of us tend to ask why. Why did this happen? Why did this happen to me? Why didn't it work out? And we are analyzing, and in a lot of cases we might have just been at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people. And so by trying to understand why something happened, it really keeps us stuck in this analysis paralysis and stops us from moving forward. So the view should always be on, okay, this happened, how can I move forward? And of course we need to become aware of the stumbling blocks and take them as part of the process. So just as I talked earlier on about the 3 phases of change, stumbling blocks, setbacks, and hardship, they are just part of these phases, and usually the transition phase, when we're trying to move towards a new situation and things trip us up and stop us temporarily. So do you want to just come in here, or shall I keep going with the other points?
Well, let me, we're going to stop and take a break. I just wanted to make one point first, and that is sometimes it's helpful to ask yourself the question and reframe it to be, why is this happening for me rather than to me? And when you use that word for me, then it changes the mindset to be looking for some value, some gift, some lesson that we could learn from the experience. No, we didn't want this experience, and it was life-altering in ways we never expected or desired. But is there something that has come out of it in our own personal growth or in our wisdom or something that we could look at to give it some value and to help us overcome the overwhelming tragedy behind it all? And when we reframe it that way, it very often is more helpful for us to find a reason to move on and hope for a future being a little different.
Yes, I totally agree with you, and that's a very, very good and simple way of putting it. I call it count your treasures, because we've probably all encountered people who say, my God, I didn't know I had this strength. You know, because suddenly they discover they have strength, or they say, this cancer was the best thing that happened to me because I really connected with my family. So, as you say, there is a lot of treasures in adversity.
I love that. Thank you. So we're going to take a quick break now. You've been listening to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network, and the show is Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sedaka. And we've been interviewing Christiana Starr, and we're going to continue the program in just a couple of minutes. Okay, we're back again. This is Rosalind Sedaka with Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. And I'm talking today to Christiana Starr, who's a psychologist and author of the new book, Recover, Rebuild, and Thrive. And we are talking about some really challenging situations that happen to people when they are dealing with adversity and issues that they did not want, but that happened in their life, and how they could handle it. And so, Christiana, I wanted to ask you what you suggest people do when they're feeling overwhelmed.
Well, I think the best way of dealing with it is to tame the gang of three. Now, the gang of three is emotion, thinking, and the body. And I call them gang of three because they are intimately connected, and whatever happens for one of the three affects the other. So, like any other emotion, feeling overwhelmed is difficult to address directly. If we tell ourselves, I should be calm, it really just causes us to get more agitated and distressed. So a good starting point when people are feeling overwhelmed is the body, which means using self-calming strategies to settle down our nervous system, breathing, holding a posture, visualization, qigong, heart math, you name it. Different things work for different people. So if you feel overwhelmed, instead of telling yourself, I shouldn't be feeling this way, the thing is to just settle your body first, and that will absolutely affect and reduce your overwhelm. The other gang member, the thinking part, it really involves to challenge catastrophic thoughts like, I can't do this, it will be terrible, I'm just a failure, it won't work out, and so on. Because if you tell yourself this kind of thinking and thought, it's just increasing your overwhelm and upset and distress, obviously. And often thoughts are automatic, and it means they're not true and they're not facts. They tell us a lot of things, like when they say, I can't do this. In most cases, we can. So we need to ask ourselves, is this thought realistic and rational? And if it's extreme and sabotaging our efforts, we need to find replacement thoughts that are more helpful. So I'll give you an example. If I make a plan and apply it step by step, the task will be less daunting. That would be a more realistic and reasonable way of thinking than to say, it won't work. Nothing will work. Everything is finished. I'll give you another example. What I do now, it might not be perfect, but I'll get it done. It's just one issue, not the end of the world. And one failure doesn't mean I'm hopeless and incompetent.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, instead of thinking everything is a catastrophe and telling yourself how hopeless everything is, you put it into a better perspective. And as I mentioned earlier, take a bit of a helicopter view on the situation, and then change your thoughts to that.
Yes.
So, and for any kind of emotions, overwhelm, upset, distress, just remember to address the gang of three.
That's excellent advice. I find that whenever there's something troubling going on with me or with clients, the first question is, what are you telling yourself? And if you catch yourself and listen to what you're telling yourself, it is not supportive. It is not helping you in any way. We are our own worst enemies in so many ways, and especially with those shoulds that we have. We beat ourselves up with those internal shoulds, and we take a situation that might be disturbing or unpleasant and make it twice as difficult and upsetting for ourselves because of our self-talk. So it's wonderful to be able to find ways of catching ourselves in those self-talk conversations and then change what we're saying, and your body immediately relaxes and refuels itself in a more positive way just by letting go of that negative tirade that we inflict on ourselves, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And you're just reminding us, of the interaction between body, thought, and emotion. Again, which is something we often forget. We just think, oh, I feel terrible, and allow our thoughts to go on and on. But as you say, we are masters at self-sabotage, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Especially, in our cultures, if we haven't been taught otherwise, if we didn't have enlightened parents who knew these things, we certainly didn't get it from school. So we live in a very negative culture, and it's much easier to reinforce the negative than to remind ourselves that I have choices in how I think about things, what I tell myself, and how I behave. So it's wonderful to hear your advice, because at these times especially, we really need to be stopping and giving ourselves another opportunity to do it differently to get better results. And before we proceed, I wanted to give you a chance to tell us about your new book, because it is wonderful to know that there's a book out there that's covering a lot of the kinds of things we've been discussing. It's called Recover, Rebuild, and Thrive. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about it?
Well, it's a practical guide for moving on from difficult life changes, and the way I've written it is for people, everyday people. So it's not academic, it's not highfalutin. It's very, very practical. It has two parts, one for recovering and rebuilding, and the third part is really about thriving, which means creating a new life. And so each chapter has a case study from my practice, and I'm using this case study to illustrate certain strategies and information and insights. So I have found with my readers, and where I got the feedback straight away, that they love these case studies because it really brings it to life for them.
Mm-hmm.
And, there is a case study about death. The funny one, the one is funny because, it's funny because people like it so much, in the sense that it's the story of an adult daughter and her two children moving back into the house with her parents, and consequently reorganizing all their furniture and a bit of upheaval. And I don't know about you in America, but this is happening a lot in Australia. And
Oh, yes, it is here as well.
yes, so I needed to teach these people, so that chapter is really about learning the assertiveness skills and how to deal with conflict and disagreements. So it's a book you can read from the front to the back, or you can just pick out particular issues that that you're dealing with and want to address. And it's also not just for people coming through adversity. It's also really a complete program for self-change. So if you think, gosh, I'm really not, I discover that I'm reacting in very habitual ways, you will find out how to change that and, to get more choices in your life. So
Wonderful.
That's just my book in a nutshell. But there is a lot of free resources on my website. There is a free little e-book about a similar topic, Moving On When Life Has Changed. And there's many, many blog articles and also on the same, well, not the same, but similar resources on my social media platforms.
Excellent. So what is your website?
It's christianastar.com. Now, a lot of people think it's Christina, but it's actually Christiana. So
I'm going to spell that. CHRISTIANA star,
yes.
STAR.com.
Yes.
Correct?
That's right.
Wonderful.
Yes,
So
right.
people can access your free resources as well as information about the book at that website. And you were kind enough to be offering 10 free e-books of the book to our listeners. So I'm going to invite our listeners to send me an email at rosalindwrites@gmail.com. That's ROSALINDWRITES@gmail.com. And the first 10 emails I get for the request for the e-book, Christiana's e-book, when we will send that to you, Recover, Rebuild, and Thrive. So take advantage of that opportunity. Visit Christiana's website as well. And while we have a few minutes left, I wanted to ask you another question about the resources that you do provide to people who want to deal with a crisis or enhance their personal power and achieve success on their own terms. What else do you have available?
If you are in Sydney, I'm available for personal consultations in my private practice. But I also do phone consults and Skype or Zoom sessions for people from overseas if they want to contact me via my website, and then we can organize something.
Excellent.
So, yes. So there's a whole range, all the free things I've written, and this book which puts it all into one volume, and the personal work.
So before we have to leave you and leave the expertise that you've been so kind to share with us, what takeaways do you have for our listeners on this topic to help people remember that despite the difficulties they may be facing or haven't gotten over yet, what is it that they can do that can give them a new start and a new perspective on it?
Well, one is I think we need to remember that people are much more resilient than we think. So, to trust yourself that even though things might look terribly bleak at the time, that you have what's in you, and you have the support or can find the support you need to make a fresh start and to create a new life. So it is trusting our own ability to deal with adversity and not give up on ourselves. I also think that we haven't mentioned self-compassion. And I think it's really important, you know, that we remember to treat ourselves as we would treat our best friend, because sometimes we are hard on ourselves and push and think, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and I'm not succeeding well. I think we need to understand and accept that we're not perfect, and we deserve to give ourselves the same love and affection that we have for other people.
I love that, Christiana. I think that's such a valuable thing to remember. And what else did you have?
Well, just to remember the Gang of Three, because that really puts into a nutshell what we've talked about. You know, and to remember that we have the choices.
Yes, which for me is the most important insight, that once I got that, it has carried me through so much in life, to remember there are choices. It's not just this or that, because sometimes we close our mind, we close our heart, we close our eyes, and we think we're stuck, and the stuckness is just within us. It's not that the situation has no other options. Once I found that in my own life, it just opened so many doors for me and enabled me to live a much richer life, because choice is a gift. And it's a blessing, and we have to keep looking for them or seek out help from professionals such as yourself to help find those choices, because sometimes we just don't realize that they're right around the corner from us. So I want to thank you so much, Christiana Starr. You've been just delightful, and your information has been so helpful. I so appreciate it, and I want to remind everyone to be looking for Recover, Rebuild, Thrive, Christiana's new book, which is going to be a valuable life resource for anyone who reads it and gives it as a gift. And again, you've been listening to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This is Rosalind Sadaka with Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living. And if you have any issues related to divorce, dating, and moving on after divorce, you can visit my website, childcentereddivorce.com, or womendatingafter40.com, or mensdatingformula.com, and find resources and books, courses, and programs that are tailored for the incidents and experiences that you're having in life. So thank you, everyone. Till next time, this is Rosalind Sadaka. Bye-bye for now.
You're listening to WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, Singles Talk Radio channel, where we take a lighthearted and candid approach to discussions on the journey of relationship loss, divorce, parenting, being single, relationships building, dating, and yes, sex. Join our listeners and begin living your best life.